There we go.
What is going on here?
No, I think we're good. Hold up. All right. Yep. There we go.
All right. Thank you, Shay. Probably because we have to do different settings for every different type of workshop and webinar. So I have webinars, I have workshops, and I have the live stream here. And then I have numerous conferences with interviews with various organizations, and each one requires different settings, and we try to do our best to put the settings back where they need to be, but sometimes that doesn't work. But here we are. So thank you all for being here with me today. Let me just oh yeah, okay. Also, I have the wrong address, so I'll get that address to you by the end of the day, and by the end of this broadcast. The address where you can get the soundtrack. This is where you can go to ask a question or anything to do with the live streams. scientificsounds.com/ask-a-question. And this is where you can go to see all the live streams that I've done up to this point. bit.ly Dr. Thompson Live. That's all the live streams I've done since the beginning. Okay. So we're talking about cosmic roots, and that's sort of a multifaceted question, because it depends on whether the cosmic root of all things, according to quantum physics, would be consciousness itself arising from nothing. And according to the book by Terence Witt, nothing is what this looks like. This is nothing. This is what zero mathematically related to itself in all possible mathematical values that sum to zero. This is what that looks like, where plus and minus and divide and cosine and arrays and everything else, every other kind of relationship of zero to itself. The relationship itself is what pops out of zero, something that pops out of nothing. And that's all of this with the relationships. Underlying all of it is consciousness, and a very Zen kind of idea that consciousness itself is nothing. Therefore, it's eternal, because nothing never had a beginning and nothing will never end. So it's the only mathematical value of all values in math that by definition has to be infinite, with no beginning and no end. But be that as it may, where reality itself, from a quantum standpoint, is a group mind, collective unconscious, moment by moment, decision by consensus that we are all making about what reality is and what it looks like and what it feels like. This is our collective decision about what the next moment looks like. And when we look upon the world that we currently have, and if we are chagrined by that, and we're not satisfied with the world that we have right now, and the way that this world is going, then it's up to us as a collective to change our mind. And seeing as most people have no idea how to access the part of big mind that has the power to make that change, because small mind does not. Small mind is an appendage off of big mind. Small mind is a tool, like a finger, like a fingernail, like a hand. It's a tool that's used by the part of me with power, but it has no independent power of its own. It can influence the whole. if I bang my finger with a hammer, then my whole body is affected by that. But tapping into big mind direct, going straight to the source of what decides what reality is going to be, which is big mind bigger than me. That I myself, my own individual consciousness, as deep down as I can go, is an appendage of the larger body, the larger collective mind that we all are. Then it's only by the power of numbers of coming together to pull more and more and more of us as conscious entities linked together, forming a node, forming a node that can influence the coupled oscillator connection with other nodes, and draw them all together, similar to how a brain network works. So we've got individual neurons, and each neuron is connected by many axons out to other neurons, so they're all networked up together. But those neurons tend to form clustered arrays of neurons in massive groups that cluster themselves together and form an array for a specific purpose. A giant cluster of neurons forming the temporal lobe for hearing, or the visual lobe for vision, or smell or touch. That's an example of arrays of neurons that are networked to other arrays. So that's sort of what the live streams are all about, here to entrain our brainwaves together to create an ever-growing node composed of ever larger numbers of conscious neurons, so that we can create a force that will affect other nodes throughout the world. And once we link with other nodes, then we become an array. And once we become an array of a certain magnitude, then we can flip the quantum field and switch things. Similar to what happens in spontaneous remission. One day you've got cancer, the next day it's gone. Because something shifted deep inside big mind, where a different decision about the next moment was made. I don't think I'm going to be that person with cancer. I think I'll let that go. Bang, it's gone. So every culture, as I talked in one previous live stream, and we talked about the origin of things, the Genesis stories, that every culture has a different Genesis story about how all this began. The Christian Genesis story is, in the beginning was the Word. Most religious cultures on earth have some similar Genesis story where the beginning was the vibration of some kind. The Word, the Om, all those great traditions have some variation of the fact that vibration was first. Later came light. And the more that I see information from my news feeds coming through that confirm this more and more, where I had previously talked about the idea of sonoluminescence, where sound waves focus to a central point in a container of water, force that water to create a bubble that collapses in something called cavitation. And when it collapses with such incredible force that it creates photons. It forms a light, a very bright light, and a light that is hotter than the surface of the sun. And it expands and collapses and expands and collapses so rapidly that you can't tell that it's fluctuating. It looks like a solid, steady micro sun in a beaker filled with water with transducers attached. Sound waves are mechanical energy waves moving through a medium. pure energy moving through a medium. And when I talk to you, it's through air. Sound travels through water 5 times better than air. Through a solid 5 times better than water. My body is 70% water and 30% bone, minerals, and microtubules. Microtubules have piezoelectric properties, which means that the sound waves distorting those microtubules, torquing them, generates an electrical pulse, which is the counterpart of the sound wave. And as we saw a live stream ago, that the newest information from Scientific American shows that the electrical information flowing from a neuron down the axon connect to other neurons is actually a sound wave. It's a mechanical energy wave that's moving down the axon as a wave of pressure that's squeezing and distorting the compounds that form the insulation layer on the outside of the nerve, the myelin sheath. And when it deforms, it switches from a liquid into a liquid crystal, which then has piezoelectric effects and generates an electrical pulse, which is the counterpart of the wave of the mechanical energy wave moving at the leading edge of that wave, are electrical pulses being generated by the piezoelectric effect of the distortion of the cell membrane on the outside. So the electrical pulses that we're measuring with an EEG from the brain are an after effect of sound waves moving down the axons. This is ordinary reality, folks. Stranger than fiction. But it's just another example that in the beginning was the Word, that sound waves, energy waves, pure energy, mechanical energy waves is the foundation, and light is the after effect. And when we look more back towards the Big Bang, so to speak, if you believe in the Big Bang, then there was a massive explosion. And what is an explosion? It's a pressure wave. It's a mechanical energy wave. So in the beginning was the explosion of a mechanical energy wave that formed huge ripples coming out. And the ripples were interacting with each other, and every interaction place creates cavitation, which creates suns and stars and galactic nebula and all the rest, and black holes, where we have phase cancellation black holes, we have summation, we have white holes, so to speak, a star, a sun, a sonoluminescence. And that's reflected in a fractal hologram inside my own brain, inside my own cells, inside my quanta that form the atoms of my body. All of it is reflected sort of back and forth. In the new sort of religion that we have in the 20th and 21st century, the religion of science, where the scientists are the priesthood, and the Church of Science says that the universe started with a Big Bang, and the Big Bang had had an after explosion, and then it had cooling down, and things started to sediment, and atoms began to be formed, and compounds and stars and planets and all the rest coalesced out of that as it cooled and expanded. And here we are. Life eventually arose. And the question of where did life come from is the big enduring question from a worldview, a genesis story of the Church of Science. A genesis view that there's an objective universe out there, and life was something that was an after effect, that somehow life began on Earth at some primitive primordial part where maybe lightning bolts hit the warm water, and there was some chemicals there that somehow got activated, like the Frankenstein movie. But the idea that the universe is conscious, that it's alive, that consciousness comes first. And that from the standpoint of the Vedas, this massive substance that forms what we call a vacuum, which is not a vacuum, it's a substance that's too subtle to measure, is consciousness itself in the act of thinking of a thought, before a time. But those ripples that are coming out are massive and gigantic, and whole galaxies ride on the crest of these waves. I just saw today another video of the Andromeda galaxy showing how it flows and ripples over the wave of the massive gravity waves that are still issuing forth from the Big Bang, which means that there is a substance there that the galaxies are floating on top of. It's not just an empty vacuum. When we go into the Genesis story of Earth itself, where the the galaxy was forming and things were coalescing and planetoids were being formed by rubble and particle smashing together and sticking together and forming larger and larger and larger globe of sort of molten rock that was continually being bombarded by meteors and asteroids and huge gigantic collisions, and Earth was basically a giant ball of lava, of molten material that was continually being bombarded and added to. And as things began to slowly cool, and this lava cooled to a point where it could make solid structures, eventually the entire planet cooled and dried, and now it was just a giant barren sort of lava slag, series of mountains and continents that were all deeply connected together into a giant solid planet. One of the live streams from long ago, I discussed when I was discussing zero-point energy and scalar waves. And there's a Russian scientist that I studied with. His name was Konstantin. He's the world expert on scalar waves. And he also has a whole treatise, scientific treatise on neutrinos. Neutrinos are those weird particles that have such little mass that they can pass all the way through a planet and not strike anything. And there's trillions of them passing through your body right as we speak right now, all the way through the whole planet. They have huge underground structures filled with a special type of water specifically to collect a neutrino. Sooner or later there will be a random collision of a neutrino that actually hits something. They've got these huge, giant places filled with water with sensors to catch that moment so that they can understand more about neutrinos. From the standpoint of Constantine, neutrinos are constantly, issuing from the sun, from the explosive powers of the sun. Neutrinos are one of the things that come out of that. And when the history of planetary physics was first put out, nobody knew about neutrinos, and nobody knew about the fourth state of matter called plasma. So there's solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. And plasma is what happens at the sun. Solar wind explodes, the sun explodes in these nuclear fireballs, and the force is so powerful that it strips the atoms into the component parts, protons, electrons, and neutrons, and now they're charged electromagnetic particles, positive, negative, neutral, floating around in a cloud called a plasma that has properties that sort of are like a gas and sort of are like a fluid. It's an odd new thing, and it's electromagnetic. And it's that cloud of the plasma, the charged particles, that strikes the planet's ionosphere, makes it resonate. And that's where the space sounds came from. The resonation of those ions between the solar wind and the ionosphere. They vibrate exactly within the range of human hearing, 20 to 20,000 hertz. And they sound like dolphins and whales and ocean and choirs and Tibetan bowls, and it's just mind-blowing stuff. But I, devoted a whole thing to that at one point. But the neutrinos pass through the Earth, but neutrinos have a special attraction and affinity towards plasma, the fourth state of matter. Actually, plasma has the ability to trap neutrinos. And even though neutrinos have minimal mass, they do have some mass. And give it a few billion years of collection, and they begin to amass in the center of the Earth, where the plasma is. The pressures of the Earth, at the very core of the Earth, is not a iron ball, it's iron plasma. The pressure is too great to have anything solid there. It would have to be melted, but the pressures and the heat at the center of the Earth are so far beyond just simple melting. The melting metal would become a gas, and the gas would become a fluid, and the fluid would become a plasma. And plasma traps neutrinos. And that means that as the neutrinos bombard from the sun over the billions of years, the Earth itself begins to get larger in diameter. The core is expanding and it's pushing on the Earth. And that cooled, rocky core of the Earth's surface, as the Earth itself begins to expand in its diameter, these surfaces would start to crack. And that became the first cracks between the continents, according to Constantine. That the Pangaea, the original Earth, where all the continents were together and then they drifted apart, they didn't drift apart. The Earth expanded like a balloon and they separated from each other as they cracked open, and the diameter and the volume of the Earth got big, and what used to cover it completely cracked open and separated from each other and became the continents that we have. But constant bombardments of asteroids and meteors into the planet, as it slowly cooled, it would remolten it, and then that would cool. And eventually the solid portions of the Earth would form, what I just described as continents. And then it started to separate out with water. And one of the big questions is, where did the water come from? Because it couldn't just come from the planet because it was molten. It just doesn't spontaneously arise. But we do know that the planet was wet. And it may be that the ancient Earth was completely a water world at one point with no dry land. And there's ample evidence to show that this is absolutely true. Water lines at the top of Mount Everest and things like that. Tops of mountain peaks we see ocean life and the remnants of living creatures that only live in the bottom of the sea at the tops of mountains. A water planet, a water world. Essentially is what we are anyway. I mean, 70% of Earth is water. 70% of your body is water. It's a fractal hologram, the grand oceanic world of Earth. It's weird. Why are we calling it Earth when only, 30% of the Earth is Earth and 70% is water? Earth should not be called Earth. It should be called Agua, the planet Agua. We're all christened, we're all baptized in water. First 9 months is in water, right? We're floating. We're water beings, water creatures. Our blood plasma is a saline solution. It's salty. It's like ocean water. Like I said once before, this is a spacesuit for an ocean water being to live on land, where we carry the ocean inside of us. But the grand ocean planet of Agua, which later had land formations that began to appear. But the prevailing idea is that comet strikes and asteroid strikes onto the Earth that continued for millions and millions of years. That's where the water came from. And even today, there's ample evidence that comets and asteroids all have water. Comets in particular have a big comet tail. That's water vapor. As they get close to the sun, the solar wind begins to bake the frozen ice and turn it into water vapor, and that's the trail you see. So it's not a stretch of the imagination to see that if you have thousands and thousands and thousands of these meteors and asteroids striking the Earth over millions of years, and all of them have water, then sooner or later the Earth is a water planet. And as the neutrinos continue to strike the core of the Earth plasma and get trapped there, and the Earth continues to expand, that total water planet would eventually have some land poking up through the water, because it's getting larger and larger. The land mass is getting larger, but the water is staying the same. Water in stardust shows alien life may be common across the universe. One thing that we know for sure, at least about the Earth, is that water forms the common bond of all living things. Everything that's alive depends on water, on land or under the water. Our cellular structure is primarily water, and the cells are floating in a matrix of extracellular fluid that's mostly water. And water seems to be extremely abundant in the universe, unlike what we had thought, decades ago. There's something here, water everywhere. Water in these strikes that are populating the Earth with water and terraforming the Earth as it slowly cools into hot pools of water. And within those hot pools of water, we end up with all of the necessary ingredients of complex molecules, water at a certain temperature for life itself. And that brings us to this concept of panspermia. It's the idea that life has traveled between worlds on asteroids and comets and other kind of rocks flying around that have life itself, bacteria, primitive bacteria. Some people think that panspermia is a conscious event, that microorganisms on these sort of rocky seed pods shot out into space are deliberately sent by alien civilizations. Be that as it may, that's not necessary, because we've already seen the basic building blocks of proteins and DNA on meteors and asteroids. They've landed on asteroids and taken pictures and taken samples, and they see organic compounds there, all of the necessary ingredients to make life. So the idea of panspermia becomes more and more real, more and more an active idea, where we have basic building blocks of life, and in some cases bacteria. They just dug up a bacteria that was 40 million years old and it came to life. We already know that there's 3 different strains of bacteria that can survive in a vacuum in space in the space station. They've seen them. They're there. So life has a way of hanging on and doing the impossible things. So these rocks that fly around in space that we call asteroids or meteors or whatever, they're seed pods that have water, that have organic compounds. In some cases, they have living things like bacteria, and they seed the universe. And perhaps where they come from is other planets that were alive that blew up or got struck by a giant asteroid and broke them apart. Who knows? But be that as it may, in the primitive Earth, that's the most likely outcome for organic life to have found a perfect spot to reside and grow in the warm waters of early primitive primordial Earth. Things that begin to bacteria coalesce together into symbiotic relationships and form more multicellular organisms because it's an advantage to cooperate over to compete, which eventually forms multicellular organisms like you and me that can actually crawl out of the ocean with a spacesuit and live on dry land. But the fact that these organic compounds have been found in space, have been found on asteroids, have been found on meteors, lends all the credence we need to know about panspermia, the idea that life is everywhere. Water is everywhere. The basic building blocks of life are seeded throughout the universe and are just looking for a nice little home of the perfect Goldilocks temperatures, distance from the sun, gravity, to take hold. Alien life, making a home, adapting to local circumstances, becoming you and me eventually. And all of it based on water. Water, the magic substance. The fact that we have H2O, oxygen, and 2 hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most abundant atom in the whole universe. It's the foundation atom of all atoms. Hydrogen is the ultimate. And 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen bind together in a very specific way because of what oxygen looks like as an atom and what hydrogen looks like as an atom. They complete their shells in such a way that they form an exact angle, 104.5 degrees angle between the oxygen and the hydrogen, and something about that angle forces the water molecule to have a bent shape into a tetrahedron, one of the 5 primary platonic solids that make all things in the universe. The basic architecture of everything, the sacred geometry of nature, is boiled down to the 5 platonic solids. And that gives water a property of having a charge, a positive and negative polarity. And because it has a positive and negative polarity, it has electromagnetic effects. And those electromagnetic effects are another thing that is a prerequisite for living things to have. Something about positive, negative attraction and repelling makes it possible to attract other chemical compounds and form complex life forms. So oxygen and 2 hydrogens. Hydrogen is a positive charged atom and oxygen is a negative charged atom. So that makes polarity. It makes this angle that I'm talking about, 104.9. Water is one of the most amazing compounds in the universe. It's got properties that no other compound has. Most other compounds are all very similar to each other in how they behave. Water is in a class by itself. It's the only compound that when it forms its solid form, its frozen form, when it freezes, the molecules line up to form an orderly crystal structure. The bends, this bend here, 104.9 bend, in the molecules prevent them from packing too closely, which leaves a lot of tiny gaps and holes. That's why ice floats, because it has gaps and holes and it's not so solid because of this magic angle here and its polarity. So in its liquid form, water molecules are able to actually pack better together, and the positive and negative charges pull the molecules together and make it denser than its solid form. And so this is also unique. Water is the only, compound that its solid form floats on its liquid form. Most the solid form sinks. It's heavier than its liquid form. But ice is unique that way. So also, water is the only compound that has all three forms, the liquid form, the solid form, and the gaseous form, all within a temperature range of life. So life can use all three forms of this one compound simultaneously, and that's a unique feature of water. Water is a universal solvent. It will, because of this bonding angle and because of the polarity, it is the universal solvent. It can dissolve any other compound. That's also unique. So no mystery that life used water as the foundation for your body. Your brain is 80% water. Water has surface tension because of the way that the liquid form and these bonds hold together, these electromagnetic bonds. It forms a surface tension that gives water its also unique ability to form these kind of bubble structures and still hold together. Surface tension is a huge element in what it requires for your body to be alive. The surface tension allows water to do all kinds of remarkable things biochemically that no other compound can do. So as primitive Earth is forming and more complex molecules are aligning together around water, and more life forms are starting to arise in the ocean, and as the Earth is expanding and exposing dry land forms, sooner or later, some evolutionary factor will explore out of the grand ocean. The most primordial sort of force and image unconsciously recognized by psychotherapists and hypnotherapists all over the world. The image of the ocean, the sound of the ocean, the concept of ocean is representative of the deepest part of the collective unconscious mind. The ocean, mother of all things, the origin of life, a planet of water. Everything depends on the water, in the ocean and outside on, quote, dry land. Everything in a giant symbiotic relationship with water as its core. And water dispersed throughout the whole universe, freely, everywhere. And these creatures that we share the planet with, particularly the dolphins and the whales and the cephalopods, the most intelligent creatures on Earth, are right up there with us, aware, sentient, smart. There's evidence that dolphins were on land and they went back to the sea. I think that's smart. Screw this, death and taxes, are you kidding me? Jobs? No, I think I'll go back to the ocean and just play. Eat and play and make babies. That sounds pretty intelligent to me. But then here we are. Eventually it becomes us as the sentient beings. We are the ones christened in water for 9 months. And then we eject out of the primal ocean of the amniotic fluid in the womb onto dry land. We have our own miniature evolutionary story. We arrive in the void. At 16 to 24 weeks, all of our senses come online. We have our first experience But we're in the dark, and a nose and mouth are filled with fluid, so the only thing we're experiencing is sound and vibration. So, of course, in the beginning was the word. Pretty much every culture, because all of us experience the same thing. In the beginning was the sound vibration, the sound and the vibration. And then we came out on dry land. We stepped out of the sea onto our water planet, where it's now firmly recognized that water is extremely abundant throughout the solar system and the whole universe. It's no surprise that there's water on various planets. And probably one of the main reasons why water is not on a planet is because it lost its atmosphere and the water all just evaporated away. It got burned away by the sun. And now the latest stuff that's come out in the last year, there's a massive ocean that has been discovered near the Earth's core. Inside the Earth is also a massive ocean of water. Scientists discovered a massive reservoir of water stretching down 650 miles into the lower mantle. 3 times as much water volume as the Earth's oceans combined. The water is bound up in porous blue rock called ringwoodite and sweats the water out as it transitions from the lower to the upper mantle. Mind-blowing. This here would be the iron core, which I am saying is not solid, it's not liquid, it's not gas, it's a plasma. The pressures at the center of the Earth are so great that even a vapor can't exist. But here's this massive ocean deep under the Earth's crust, that all of the surface oceans on Earth are sort of a pale reflection of Earth, the water planet. And this is just new as well. July 25th. This is like 10 years ago. The largest, oldest mass of water in the universe has been discovered. International team of astronomers have discovered the largest, oldest mass of water ever detected in the universe. The newly discovered cloud of water vapor, equivalent to 140 trillion times the water in Earth's ocean, is more than 12 billion light years from Earth and surrounds the huge black hole of a quasar. Water. Unbelievable, really. Like water freely circulating in the vacuum of space. Amazing. Wow. Water everywhere. The water you drink is older than the planet you're standing on. Because the planet was formed and was hit by rocks floating throughout the universe that are hundreds of billions of years old. Water in space, on a super Earth, and on Earth, there is more water around us than you ever imagined. Surely Earth is not the only place we'll find life. Wherever you have water, you have the possibility. Water is the foundation that's necessary. Although we have seen that creatures can evolve so that they can switch their biology to some other substance. It's just the water is the most abundant and the easiest to work with. So if it's not there, somehow life can find a way in certain instances. Water would probably be its first choice. But this is a great example of water tension. The properties of the molecular form of water that forms these bonds that form surface tension. But when you think about the fact that, this here, it's one of the most profound esoteric substances in the whole universe. This magical, completely clear, oxygen hydrogen combination that forms 70% of my body and 80% of my brain. That's got electromagnetic properties. That's got strange and interesting properties of all other compounds on a planet. And that is a necessity for life everywhere. So today we're exploring with the soundtrack deep ocean, underwater life, water in general as the sacred substance and origin, the universal origin, the root of all living things, water, the sacred substance in the universe. And so as an ode to that, here we go. The water of the universe populating everything. Headphones, please. And here we go. So here's the address where you can get the soundtrack. scientificsounds.com/cosmic-roots. And sometime today, perhaps right after this is over, drink some water. But be present when you do that. Use that as a time. Oh, this is a good time to realize myself, to become self-aware as I drink water, the substance of life. Wow. Wow. Water. Give it a try. Until next time, thank you all for being with me. Love and health and happiness to